So I don't know where to start. I've been thinking about this for a long time. At least a month. Longer. I know every time April rolls around, this is, kind of. And, so this year is 15 years. It's one of those things where, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it seems like it's been longer, you know? So, thanks to Open Diary going down, I don't really have a lot of my old entries that I dedicated and talked about Robin. And so, kind of doing this therapy. Robin was just one of those really unexpected friends that changes your world, changes your life, changes you. She did. I was a kid when I met her in high school, and she had a daughter, just a little younger than I was, and we all congregated on the same, you can call it like a message board. It was a bulletin board system, a BBS. This is before the internet was the internet, and you needed a dial-up modem, and a local individual would have a ton of phone lines and set up basically a local meeting place online, that you could all congregate. It had like trivia, some little games that you could play, chat rooms, things like that, but it was all local people. This was way before long distance. This is the mid-90s, early 90s, yeah. And she was one of the moderators. So we would pay her a visit to pay her so that we could get time on this bulletin board system, this hangout. And we would get together once a month sometimes and actually meet the people behind the screen names, A lot of times it was bowling, sometimes it was laser tag, just different things. And, I really didn't know Robin. And it was through one of the games she and her friends all played. And eventually I started playing. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of EverQuest. Basically, the guy that created EverQuest played on this. It was a MUD, which is basically, everybody knows what World of Warcraft is, all these MMOs. It was basically an MMO, but it was all text. EverQuest was essentially, this guy played this specific MUD that we all played, and it was all text, and he was able to create EverQuest pretty much copying off of his experience on this MUD that we all played. So we met people, I met people from all over Canada, Russia, Sweden, but there was a large New Orleans contingent that played, and Robin was a big part of that. And so when I started playing that game, she and I became friends, and then we started talking, and she was, obviously older than I was by a good bit, and she was really easy to talk to, and I was a mess of a kid. I just, really good heart, meant really well, but had no idea what I was doing in life and relationships, even sometimes in friendships. But she was the first person that I really felt comfortable talking to and opening up, like anything. And we talked about everything and anything. And she was just one of those amazing listeners and so non-judgmental and a fascinating person. She was always trying to get me to watch Charmed, and she was big into that and those types of shows. There weren't too many, like, supernatural fantasy-based shows back then. She was a big Buffy fan, I remember, I think. I never watched those shows. Couldn't get into them. Even though I'm like a big sci-fi fantasy guy, but there's a few memories that just really stick out. One, just how resilient she was. I've had an interesting life, and I've been through a lot, but I don't think I'll ever go through what she went through. I mean, she lived with cystic fibrosis, and we were talking on the phone one time, and she said that she, as a kid, she was sent to a cystic fibrosis camp, where other kids had cystic fibrosis, and CF killed people. You did not live long with CF. She said that I think there was like 15 kids at this camp. She was the only one that was still alive. They were all dead, but by a long margin. She really outlasted them, and I don't think any of them made it past like 22 years old. They all gave in and succumbed to not gave in, but their bodies gave in. And Robin would have to go into the hospital every few months. I don't remember if it was every like 4 to 6 months, but whenever she did, my best friend Brian at the time would always drive me over, because I didn't drive. I bum rides from Brian and Steve all the time. And we would always go visit her in the hospital. And so one time we're visiting her, and we're joking around, and something came up about me and poetry, right? And Robin started teasing me about how, well, why do you write poetry? And I'm like, oh, well, it's this creative expression, and, it's an outlet for me to work challenge my brain and work my craft and all this nonsense. And she's like, yeah, you do it to get girls. Come on. And I'm like, well, it's not working really well. No, I didn't say that. I was like, no, of course I don't do it to get girls. And she's like, oh yeah, why? Well, prove it. And I'm like, well, how can I prove that, right? It's not something. She goes, well, have you ever written a poem about a friend? And I'm like, sure, I've written poems about friends. She's like, have you ever written a poem about, say, I don't know, your best friend? And Brian's just like grinning ear to ear, because he knows the answer. And he's like right there with her, backing her up. Oh yeah, he writes it to get girls. And I'm like, well, no, I've never sat down to write Brian a poem. That just sounds, why would you do that, right? Which in retrospect sounds pretty awful to say, but she's like, well, if you say you've written for friends, but you've never written a poem about, inspired by, for your best friend? And so, that reinforced that, oh yeah, I wrote poetry for girls that were friends. Yeah. So that had actually inspired me to write a poem, and it was just not good. I mean, I don't even want to remember it, let alone show it to anybody. I wrote a poem for Brian, and it was, Hallmark is better. Just the worst Hallmark rejected cards would be better than this. It was just god awful, and that always stuck in the back of my head, you know. And she teased me unmercifully. And I remember when we left, Brian was just like, "You know, she's sweet on you, right?" I'm like, whatever, dude. What is it? Who even says that's sweet on you? I mean, it's kind of a nice way of saying it, but man, another memory was we were playing the mud, and there was this really big event. It was essentially sort of like a quest run by the creators of the game, and they like interacted with you live. They were able to like control all the monsters and the different like characters in the game, and it was amazing. Just absolutely cool because it was tailored completely to the group that we were in, and our reactions dictated where we went and that sort of thing. Nothing was pre-planned, you know. And they only picked like 15 people out of hundreds. I mean, I think at one point at its peak it had well over like 1,000 players, maybe more, online, like regularly. And I was picked. So was Brian. And I had I was such a newbie. I didn't belong in that group. Like, that should have been for like the best of the best. And I mean, years later I found out it was because she was really close friend. Robin she was in the group as well. She was really close friends with the creator of the game. And he actually did a really nice assortment of flowers and things like that for her funeral. That was really cool. I had no idea they were friendly at all. That was is sort of like, oh, well, that makes more sense why I was picked. Okay, he kind of gave me the hookup. But there was another time where memory that stands out is she was facing double lung transplants and cystic fibrosis. Essentially, there's a lot of fluid buildup in your lungs. Makes it really hard to breathe. It's painful. Wears you out. And she was so petite, so tiny, and just like the sweetest person you could ever imagine. And I mean, it was so bizarre to hear her like raise her voice when Joanna would be, her daughter Joanna, would be like, getting on her nerves or irritating her. It's just like, Robin, you're not allowed to be like upset. But she was facing the transplants, and she had been facing it for years. And she needed somebody to go with her to Ashmer Hospital, which is a really celebrated local hospital that owns a ton of hospitals now. It's like the Walmart of hospitals down here. But they really specialized in, and still do, in transplants, among other things. And she needed somebody to go with her to the doctors and like see the doctors, and so she asked me, and she thought I was doing her a favor. I was like, I'm honored. Like, if everybody you would ask me to go. And she was really weak at that point. She was in a wheelchair with the oxygen tank to help with her breathing. And so we spent all day there. And we talked about all sorts of different things. And, obviously the topic centered around the transplants and everything that she had gone through. And she said that she kept putting it off. And I asked her why. I mean, if this works and your body doesn't reject the lungs, which is a terrifying prospect in and of itself. Should it be successful, then your body has to hopefully accept these new lungs and not think of it as an invading problem and attack it. She said that because I know I'm going to wake up tomorrow, and it may be hell, it may be difficult for me to breathe, and it may hurt, but I know I'm going to live, and I'm going to wake up. Whereas if I do the surgery, I don't know if I'm going to wake up. So, do you gamble on, do you gamble on that surgery maybe giving you this life you've never had before? Or do you live the life that you know you've got? Even though it's difficult, you know the hardships, you know how it's going to be. And I had never thought about that before. It's just never even crossed my mind that, you're kind of staring. It makes sense to just think, okay, well, why wouldn't you have surgery? Why wouldn't you? There's a solution. Take the solution. But that was just the difference between me not living with that prospect. I'm not actually the one having to make the decision. Yeah, let's go ahead, let's try. But failure means death. That's terrifying. And so I asked her why she finally decided to do it. And she said that she had made herself a promise that she was gonna make sure Joanna graduated high school, that she turned 18, that she was an adult, that she wasn't gonna leave her child, even if she couldn't be the parent that she wanted to be. And she talked a lot about that, how, it limited her, and she wanted to do and be so much more. But she said that, it was pretty much coming up on that time, and so she did what she set out to do. And when we talked about, all of the kids from her camp not even living past, really just their teenage years, and she said that they called Joanna a miracle baby, because when she was talking about getting pregnant with her doctors, they said, you can't do it, your body will not survive. And she was working, she was, back then, I didn't know her then, but, I ended up finding out she was kind of a wild child. That would have been fun to know her back then. But, she was working, and she was living a life that, so different from the person I knew, that was really so limited in so many ways, and yet, so full of life, and wisdom and knowledge. And she said that they told her, don't get pregnant. And then when she did get pregnant, she's like, I want to have a child. And they're like, this is a really bad idea. We recommend that you don't. If you have this child, you're going to die. And she was just like, well, how am I supposed to know I'm going to have my baby? She's like, because I asked her, I'm like, how does that even register, how do you deal with that? Being told, it's you or your child, and you gotta pick. And if it's not you, and you pick your child, then you won't be there for that child. And she said, well, I just decided I was gonna have my child, and I was gonna be there for her. And she said it in like just such a way that there was no other option. Like it didn't. That other possibility of her not making it, that didn't even exist. There was no reality in which that happened. And that always just stuck with me, the way she said it. And because she was, like I said, she was on an oxygen tank, and just talking would be difficult at times. So, yeah, when she said that, it was just like, whoa. And of course, she had her child, she had Joanna, and she made it through, you know. She lived to be 39 years old. She never would tell me her age either. I didn't find that out until, she was gone. It's like, really? You took that to the grave? She always said, Brian, you don't ask a lady her age, you have no manners. I'm like, I have manners. How old are you? Like, I have no idea. She was like such a little sprite. It was almost impossible to figure out. She had such like a youthful presence, but then she was that old soul, just so full of. She's so soothing, and that's probably why I opened up to her. I don't know if I've ever been as open. I know I was never as open with anyone before her, and I don't think I have been since. Close, but it was just one of those. I don't know. I think we related to each other in a lot of ways because I had my own struggles, and we could each just talk. That was really nice. But so anyway, she transplant doctors have no manners. I mean, that guy just laid it out, and I left there terrified. I totally understood after, being there and listening to all the possibilities and all the chances for things to go wrong, and how quickly she would have to get there, and just, it was terrifying, But I never thought she would, like, it, even though he's sitting there telling me, and I know how, how much pain she's in, and how difficult life has been, and they ended up having to, like, inject her with steroid shots towards the later years. Now she hated those. Just wreaked havoc with her, and, we talked a lot that day about, her daughter. She was always worried about her. That's all she thought about. That's all she talked about. Was Joanna. And so anyway, they ended up doing a fundraiser for her, and they got a few of the local Saint stations, which is like the cheerleaders for the Saints. And then the fundraiser was washing cars. So I did go and volunteer my time to help wash some people's cars while the Saint stations offered up their time in their little outfits. And you could pay them to take a picture with them. And somebody, I forget who it was, somebody paid for me to take a picture with them. And I have it around here somewhere in a box. It's like the worst picture ever. I look so uncomfortable. I mean, they were sweethearts too, totally nice, and like I didn't want to touch them. It was like they were fine china, and I had nothing but thumbs. It's just like I'm in this picture, but not really. Don't touch me, pretty ladies in awesome cheerleader outfits. I don't know who did that. But yeah, the picture ended up making the rounds. I don't like that. I do remember that she loved this one specific. Uh, she loved there was a local. I mean, they still have like one, but there was a local restaurant chain called Semolina's, and they did all sorts of types of pastas. And the local restaurants, they kind of switched over to this chain called Zia's. It's much more successful, so they have like one Semolina's left, but they had a bunch back then. And I remember she was like talked about how much she loved this one dish, and it was but she wanted it with angel hair pasta, like it was penne or something like that, typically. So one time when we went to visit her, we went, Brian and I went, we got her some of the angel hair pasta, and I brought it in, and her eyes just lit up, and she goes, "Oh no, but is it the angel hair pasta that I love?" And she opened it up, she goes, "You remembered." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I really don't know why you want to eat your own hair." And it took her like a second, she was like, "What?" And it was such a classic moment, where you say that clever line and nobody kind of gets it, and you're kind of like sitting there going, okay, thought that was clever, maybe it's not, and then it works out and everybody laughs. Makes fun of me for being cheesy. I'm not cheesy, am I? Really? Me? Yeah, all different kinds. But anyway, so I never written a poem for Robin, and she ended up going into the hospital at Ochsner, which was, oddly enough, she lived like 45 minutes away from me, but Ochsner was only like 15 minutes away, and I don't know why, I can't tell you, but she was there for several days, and I just didn't make it a priority, I guess, to find a ride over there to visit her. And I had written her a poem called Robin's Song. And by the way, I don't ever put names and titles of my poetry. Didn't before, and I don't do it now. She might be the only person. I mean, I can't think of one where I've written. Yeah. And it's not a good poem. I mean, I wasn't a great writer back then, but, it was good enough, I guess, right? And, back then there was no smartphones, there wasn't texting. I actually had to send a copy to her sister, and her sister was going to bring it to Robin so she could read it while she was in the hospital. And she had told her about it before she left to go see her. And there was a million things on Valerie, her sister's mind. It was very insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but she had forgotten it. And so she had told me, "Don't worry, I'm gonna bring, as soon as I get back home, I'll bring it." She knows, you wrote about it, she's excited to read it, but she's really tired. So I don't think I even got to talk to her that day. And then, the next time I talked to Valerie was, my mom came in my room. I was in the middle of, I think, listening to music and writing, or I don't remember what. And my mom just was like, I always paused the music whenever somebody would come in and obviously talk to me. Just, I don't know what it was. When people say they just know something's wrong and you haven't even heard anything? My mom was just like, "Valerie's on the phone for you." I'm like, "Okay." And I picked up the phone. And she didn't say a word yet. And there was nothing, I knew. And, just, she said, you know, we lost her. She's gone. Which I didn't understand because I didn't even know that they were going to operate, that they were, that they even had lungs yet. I mean, I knew she was there, but they had gotten some, and Valerie said that they felt good, so they prepped her for surgery, and when everything was ready, they realized that the lungs were bad, and I think she was ready, I think she had held on, and I think that was just, one thing too much. So, at that point, she was ready to move on. She never got to read the poem. So, the funeral service was out in Chalmette, which is, like I said, like a 45-minute drive. Mark, my older brother, myself, best friend Brian, and probably my best friend now, Steve. Definitely my best friend now, Steve. We drove out there for the service. And when we got there, Valerie said, hey, well, first of all, okay, it was impossible to find this place. And I think back, just, if texting had existed, like I could have texted her the poem, she would have read it, she wouldn't have known. But, so, we tried to find this place, and, we kept pulling over and asking for directions. And apparently, the funeral home used to be at Pancho's, which was a Mexican buffet. So we were like, yeah, we're trying to find the funeral home, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's the old Pancho's. Yeah. And we're like, okay, we're not from here. Like, so where's the old Pancho's? And everybody tried to give us directions based on other landmarks. I'm like, okay, we don't know where the blah, blah, blah is that'll lead us to the other blah, blah, blah to the old Pancho's. So we spent, God, like an hour just going from person to person, gas station to convenience store we got turned around, just, eventually we made it there, right, to the old Pancho's, which, by the way, is really weird to be at a funeral home that you're like, people used to, be piñatas and get happy birthday sung to them on their birthday. It's just weird. And Valerie caught me outside, and she was like, hey, I want to show you something. And she had printed out and made it look really pretty the poem I'd written, right? I'm like, oh, cool. She's like, yeah, this is what I was going to give to Robin. I was wondering if you would read it. And I'm like, read it now? She's like, no, like, in front of people. Like, during the service, and people are going to get up and say some things. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course I will. Inside, I'm like, what? You want me to read this? Like, in front of people? With her? How do you even process that? And this, so I'm playing this over and over in my head, that, like, no, there's no way I can do this, like, this, I'm gonna sound like an idiot, it's terrible, like, this was meant for, and I just realized that, like, wow, she would be getting such a kick out of this right now. You know, like, she's like, would always give me such a hard time all the time about, oh, so which girl are you flirting with now? And which girl are you writing about? Oh, does she know? Are you going to show her the poetry? And here I am in front of, everybody, and I get to read some of my, bad poetry. And I think that was the first time and last time I've ever recited a poem in front of a group of people. And I remember, I think there was a lady that spoke about how Robin was a miracle, that she made it to 39. She was her case manager in some form or way with cystic fibrosis, and they just talked about how incredible it was that she made it that long, and that, she was seen, in the community, the cystic fibrosis community, is like this model of excellence. Like, look at what you can achieve. You don't have to let that illness define you or limit you, And so I had to get up there, and I went last. I was the third speaker. And I remember Joanna and her friend Maggie were sitting in the front, and Mark, Steve, and Brian were off in the left. And so I got up there, and I kept saying to myself, just read it, just read it, just read it. Just read as quickly as you can, and then go sit back down, and you'll be fine. My voice cracked. I didn't recite it fast enough. It just was. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I've ever gone through. Because I just kept thinking, like, I'm trying to tell myself that she hears it, that she's already read it, But, I choked my way through it, and went to sit down, and I remember her friend Rusty, who actually used to run the bulletin board system that we all logged on to with our dial-up modems, our 14.4 dial-up modems, 2800 baud. He said to me, he just said, I don't think anybody's going to ever be able to make fun of your poetry ever again. Because I talked about how I related this story about how she would always tease me. And it's like, yeah, that was really sweet of him to say. That meant a lot. It means a lot. And I sat down, and I was like, I think I asked Steve, I was like, how did it go? How bad was it? And I think he said to me, let me just put it this way. Hardly anyone was crying before you got up there I don't think you'll find a dry eye in the place now. Which, I don't know if that was true or not, because everything was just happening so quickly. And it's been 15 years. Every surgery I've ever had, I think about her. And I think about just how she willed herself to live. She willed herself to have her child. That she loved Joanna that much, and she wasn't going to leave. She had purpose. She wasn't going to let anything stop her. I read about her all the time. There's almost I'm gonna sit down to write. Doesn't matter what it is. At some point, I think about her while I'm writing. It may not be about her. It may not be for her. It may not have anything to do with her. She crosses my mind whenever I write. Miss my friend. I love you, Robin. Said I wasn't gonna cry before I recorded this. It's 15 years. I always think about you. I hate the month of April. April showers, right? She's a flower. The very sturdiest, most resilient, absolutely beautiful flower. You know, I've had an angel for the past 15 years watching over me. But I had an angel as a best friend even before that. And I love her. I miss her. I think it's a testament to her that she still touches me and everything that I do, everything that I work toward. I don't think she would recognize me today. I'm so different. I wish I could share that with her. I wish that I could talk to her again. Wish I got to tell her. I didn't think people died, you know? It was like 21 years old. You think the world, you think you're invincible. My mother had been sick all my life, and I took that for granted. Mom had been sick, I took that for granted. Just tell the people that you love. Tell them you love them. Tell them what they mean to you. Because she's everything.